Hello everyone, it's 12 noon Eastern Time. It's Monday, October 24th, and the cafe is open for business. Today, I guess our first meeting in about a month, I have been traveling and extremely busy with work, and like the weeks have been flying by, and so I've missed the opportunity the last few Mondays to do a training cafe, but I'm back today. Happy to be here, and as best as I can, I'm going to try to stick to the schedule of doing these every 2 weeks. But if you missed the training cafe, well, you can tap into some of my training and climbing performance knowledge other places as well. My monthly Training for Climbing podcast, you will want to check out if you haven't already, and of course trainingforclimbing.com, which is kind of an encyclopedia of free training content that you can go to anytime and use as a resource. And the Training for Climbing YouTube channel as well, which I'm trying to build out, but there's so many hours in the day, and I'm trying to find time, at least now when the weather's decent, to get outside and climb occasionally, in addition to my training, in addition to my work, and all the other stuff I'm trying to balance here. But it's all good. I'm super passionate about all this stuff, and I'm of course passionate about sharing my knowledge with you guys. So here in the cafe today, just going to make a few comments on game day nutrition. What you can eat, what you should eat, or maybe what you should avoid eating when you're at the boulders or crags trying to climb for performance. So I'll make a few comments on that, and then I'll answer some of your training questions. I see a couple of are typed in already. You can type them into the comments box on the YouTube channel, or hopefully if you type them into the Training for Climbing feed, they will appear on my interface here as well, and I'll get to that in a few minutes. So let's get started here with comments on the game day nutrition, which is I think a big deal. If you're trying to push your limits and climb your very best, the things you consume or don't consume, do play a role. Obviously, throughout the week as a athlete training, trying to recover, trying to support strength and power gains, trying to enable your body to endure hard training, hard climbing requires proper nutrition. For a more beginner level climbing or beginner level climber, nutrition, while it shouldn't be overlooked, isn't necessarily going to make a huge difference, because a beginner climber needs to learn to climb and learn all the technical skills and mental skills, and needs to eventually suss out what is the right training program for them. But most people who read my literature, tune into my videos, podcasts, are experienced to some degree, have a few years of climbing or training under their belt, and really are looking for things that are maybe smaller but more important and enable one to get through plateaus of performance or achieve the next grade or send that elusive project. And that's where dialing in little details, getting your training program optimized for you rather than copying someone else's program, getting your nutrition optimized for you, for your genetics, for your age, for the amount of stress that you put your body through, amount of calories you burn on a given day. We're all very different genetically, experientially, and so you really, I think, for a more veteran climber that has good self-awareness and is trying to become educated on these things, training and nutrition, over the course of months and years, you do kind of tend to hone in on what is that formula that works best for you. So let me just give you some basics here when it comes to boulder days or a crag day nutrition. And the first and obvious thing is to stay hydrated. Now, in a cold weather season, as we're heading into now, you typically don't sweat like you do in the summer when it's hot out. But you're still, of course, sweating some, and you're losing moisture through your breathing. And so it would be a mistake to go out to the boulders or the crag for a few hours or for a day and not carry at least some water to consume. How much? Well, I guess if it's a short session, less than 2 hours, you can probably forego consuming any water, assuming you're hydrated when you get to the boulders, to the crags. But if you're out there for more than 2 hours, you're putting in a half day or a full day, then it is important in a cold weather climate, I think, to carry 1 to 2 quarts of water. In a warmer climate, a summer situation where you are sweating more, you're in the sun, 2 to 4 quarts, probably towards the high end if you are a person that perspires a lot and you're out in the sun and sweating a lot. And I think, water is essential. Obviously, not only, consider that your muscles and connective tissues are, contain a lot of water. About 70% of their weight is water. So if you are becoming dehydrated, that compromises the muscles. It makes you perhaps more susceptible to connective tissue injuries if you're grossly hydrated and climbing hard. And another thing that is quite critical when it comes to performance is your blood volume. As you become dehydrated, your blood volume drops, your blood gets a little thicker and is harder to move through those capillaries and around your body. And that hampers performance systemically. You can end up with headaches and cramps, and becoming dehydrated is obviously not something you want to deal with. In the context of climbing in a gym, if you're sipping water while you're working out, you're good to go. And I think same thing applies to a short session at the boulders or crags. But if you're out all day, you need to pack in a few quarts of water and to sip it regularly throughout the day to help maintain hydration. So that's kind of the first thing you want to be thinking about when it comes to kind of game day nutritional support. Now, what about food? Assuming that, again, you aren't arriving at the crag depleted in glycogen, assuming you ate a good meal the night before, you had a modest breakfast with some carbohydrate, some protein, you don't need to arrive at the crag with a bag of food. And really consuming a lot of food at the crag would be counterproductive. You put a lot of food, especially hard to digest things like if you had a sub, like a Italian sub with salami and things like that. If you had something like that that you were eating at the crag and you put that meat in your belly, that is going to divert blood flow to digestion and away from your muscles, and just not ideal for a performance situation. You want to be carrying with you easy to digest, easy to carry foods that won't spoil in the heat. And so that's where things like energy bars are great. A piece of fruit. I carry bananas often with me to the crag. Cookies are easy to carry and have some carbohydrate, but they're not the optimal food, especially if they're packed with refined sugar. I do carry Fig Newtons with me at times. I think that's a pretty healthy cookie that is easy to carry in a plastic bag, 5 or 10 Fig Newtons. Oftentimes I'll make a bagel sandwich with some peanut butter and jelly on it, and then break it into thirds and eat a third of it every 2 hours. And the goal with these foods that you're eating isn't to satisfy your hunger. In fact, I think a few hunger pangs are a good thing. Kind of that feeling that you're not stuffed is a good thing for performance when you're bouldering or trying to climb your hardest. And so a few hunger pangs, I kind of take that as a sign that I kind of am feeling light and good. Now, again, I'm not saying you want to starve yourself and have a stomach ache of hunger when you're out climbing all day. That would be counterproductive. Again, my belief is if you're out there for more than 2 hours, you need to get a trickle of glucose into your bloodstream to keep blood sugar levels steady. That's the goal, is steady blood sugar levels. You don't want that spike that you would get if you ate a handful of candy or something that was filled with sucrose or glucose. Like drinking Coca-Cola or even Gatorade, I don't think that's a good thing for climbers because those are very, very sugary drinks. They're basically white sugar in liquid or corn syrup in liquid, depending on what sugary beverage you're consuming. And that's not a good food for a climber, someone in a stop and go sport where you need steady blood sugar levels, steady cognitive abilities. You don't want that energy crash that you get when you consume sugar. An hour later you crash. You want to avoid all those things. So, a lot of snack foods and prepackaged foods that are loaded with, refined flour, refined sugars would be, I think, counterproductive for most folks. Now, I guess there are exceptions to many rules. If you're out, doing a, all-day adventure in the mountains, burning tons and tons of calories. You're up on a big wall for 12 hours straight, burning tons and tons of calories. Then, maybe those, calorie-dense, sugary foods might be okay. But again, from the perspective of a performance boulderer or sport climber, where you really spend more time standing around and, are you only climbing a few minutes at a time, or out of an hour, maybe only climbing 5 or 10 or 15 minutes out of an hour, you're not burning massive amounts of calories. And that downtime is about recovery and getting yourself focused and ready for the next go. And that's where steady blood sugar is your friend, so that you're not buzzing or crashing from eating these highly refined sugar-loaded foods. So again, assuming you arrive at the crag, you've eaten well the last 24 hours. You should have a good glycogen supply in your muscle and in your liver to support, a couple of hours of combined climbing, aggregate climbing. But if you're out longer than that, or you're doing a lot of submaximal pitches, then consuming calories becomes more and more important the longer the day is. And then as you get to the end of your day, the sooner you begin to feed, the better in terms of getting recovery started for the next day. So I will often pack into the crag a protein bar, 200 calorie, 20 grams of protein bar that is kind of earmarked for eating on my hike out of the crag. And so that 20 grams of protein, 200 calories, is what I use to start the recovery process at the end of my session. Because oftentimes you have to drive or get home or get to a restaurant. Dinner could be a couple of hours off from the end of your day bouldering or climbing. And so you don't want to fast those first couple of hours after you're done climbing, waiting to get to the restaurant or get home to make dinner. You want to start the recovery process. And so having that protein bar to get the process started, I think, is a really smart thing to do. And then when you do get home or to a restaurant, a meal that has, protein, 25 to 50 grams of protein, or a protein shake, along with, a decent dose of carbohydrates that can replenish glycogen in your muscles and get you ready for the next day of climbing, if there is another day, or your workout the next day. That is very, very important. Okay, then the third thing when it comes to crag day nutrition, and then I'll get to your questions, so you can start typing them in if you have one. The third thing is, what about supplements or other things that can be ergogenic? Ergogenic meaning performance enhancing. And so the one that I think is most common that climbers have used and athletes of all types use is caffeine. Whether it's a cup of coffee, that you are drinking on your way to the crag, or maybe some caffeine pills of some kind. There are some pre-workouts that are loaded with caffeine, the pre-workouts designed for weightlifters and bodybuilders. Really, it's the caffeine that produces an effect. All the other ingredients in there have no effect really at all. They're just kind of window dressing for caffeine. And caffeine does sharpen your focus, does potentially improve power output, suppress pain signals, allow you to get a few more reps in the gym. Some evidence it can sustain endurance by freeing up fatty acids into your bloodstream that are good fuel for slow twitch fibers, so that if you're out for a long session, the caffeine can be beneficial. But for a climber, caffeine can be potentially counterproductive. So you have to be careful, and again, everybody's a little different. Caffeine can make you jittery, make you anxious. Literally, it can make you shake on the rock, which is a very uncomfortable feeling, and it can take you from feeling confident on a route to being not confident, because you have these shakes and nerves. And I know a few climbers, and even a couple of pro climbers, who shun caffeine because they just can't deal with that, or they are maybe acutely sensitive to caffeine. There are genetic factors. There's a few genetic variants that relate to your ability to metabolize caffeine. So again, you have to experiment and find out what works for you. For me, I need a few cups of coffee in the morning to really feel myself and perform my best. And usually I do a little bit of a reload of caffeine midday, early afternoon in the form of coffee, or if I'm at the Crag, in the form of a few supplements that have 100 milligrams or at most 200 milligrams of caffeine in them. And that keeps me sharp and feeling myself. But again, you have to experiment and find out what works for you. So caffeine is, the one go-to that does work for many athletes. Again, you don't, want to over-consume caffeine because A, it can obviously affect your sleep at night, but B, it could degrade your performance in terms of jitters, nervousness, anxiety, things that you don't want when you're climbing. Other things that might be of some value, especially if you're a higher end climber, doing harder, steeper routes. Beetroot extract and citrulline malate are two natural substances that when consumed in pretty significant doses, just a pinch here or there of those ingredients, a gram aren't going to have an effect. But if you have a clinically relevant dose of beetroot extract or citrulline malate, it has an effect of vasodilation, helping open up the capillaries, improve circulation, help the oxygen kinetics, and really that can be a big difference maker, especially in power endurance sports, stop and go, sprint type sports, which I view climbing as being one. When you're on a hard sport climb, it is kind of a stop and go, sprint and go sport. Bouldering also as well. It's kind of all out when you're on the boulder and then you're recovering for a few minutes between attempts. And so those ingredients can be helpful. They do have an acute effect if taken in a significant enough of a dose. You may be aware that my company PhysiVantage makes a product that has those exact ingredients in it. It's called EndureX. And so you take a big scoop of the EndureX. I actually do a scoop and a half into a quart of water, sip it during your warm-up climbs and into your first one or two attempts on a boulder or route. And it has that clinically relevant dose of both the beetroot extract and citrulline malate, and it makes a very real difference in terms of endurance and recovery. And so, climbers who have tried the EndureX, the vast majority of them feel a difference, a benefit from them. And you can go into PhysiVantage.com and read some of the customer reviews on EndureX, and you'll see that really the proof is in the sending. People find that it does indeed work. And then, one other substance that I've experimented with over the years, it can have some nasty side effects, but it can be a difference maker on very pumpy routes that make your forearms acidy and feel like they're going to explode. Those very anaerobic lactic type of exercises and climbs. And that supplement is sodium bicarbonate, which is baking soda. Now, it's a nasty substance to take a meaningful dose to have an ergogenic effect is going to require between 10 and 20 grams of sodium bicarbonate consumed in the few hours before your intense climb or exercise. I know a lot of, over the years, quite a few runners have used sodium bicarbonate, especially those middle distance runners from 400 meters to 800 meters to 1600 meters, which are very lactic races where you're basically running full on, all out to failure, hopefully getting to the finish line before failure. And so the sodium bicarbonate is a buffer for those hydrogen ions that are being produced. That so-called lactic acid doesn't really exist in the body. It breaks apart into lactate, which is actually a useful metabolic byproduct, but the hydrogen ions that split off are what lower the pH of your blood and inside the muscle cells shut down cellular function. And so by having that sodium bicarbonate as a buffer, it can allow you to sustain high intensity exercise longer. Now, the nasty side effects are that many people get upset stomachs or even diarrhea from taking 10 or 20 grams of sodium bicarbonate. So you need to experiment and see how sensitive you are to it. I use it on occasion on hard power endurance training days when I'm at home and have access to a toilet if I need it. I'm a little less likely to use it at the Crags, though I have on occasion when there's a very power endurance type route where I think like I might pump out 1 or 2 bolts from the chains. The sodium bicarbonate can make the difference to get me to the chains. And I've kind of experimented over the years how to make it work. If I mix the sodium bicarbonate into some low sugar pudding, it tends to sit in my stomach a little better and I can consume it at the Crag without any dire consequences. It's not something, again, I would recommend, but if you're someone pushing your limits, looking to experiment with a few things, it might be worth looking into. So again, in terms of ergogenics day of, it's really just caffeine, the beetroot extract and citrulline malate, and sodium bicarbonate. And other things like creatine and beta-alanine, they have no effect when taken acutely. So if you take a dose of creatine or a dose of beta-alanine, and a lot of those pre-workouts have it in there, but it does no good day of. Those are substances that must be preloaded over the course of weeks leading up to performance or over weeks just to create an effect as you train. And so I'm not saying don't take some small doses of creatine or beta-alanine, but taking them on game day has zero impact. Unless you're taking it every day in a pretty significant dose, it doesn't really load in your body in a way that it's going to be of any help. And there's really no other supplements that I think are of value that you can take game day that have an acute effect, other than the few that I just mentioned there. Okay, so I'll wrap up this portion of the cafe and get to answering a few questions. And I'm going to try to keep this short today because I am traveling tomorrow and have a lot of things to get done here before then. But if you have a training or performance question, feel free to type it in and I'll get to it right now. Okay, first up is Sam. He says, I climb at the Red River Gorge every weekend. And then during the week, I do a strength and power endurance session on Tuesday and Wednesday at the gym. Should I replace the endurance session with an aerobic session instead? Okay, so let me just be clear here on what you're asking, or actually what you're telling me you are currently doing. Strength and power, I hope you're doing that on a Tuesday, and then the power endurance is your Wednesday session. And if so, that's pretty much exactly what I would prescribe. In fact, if you go back and listen to my last Training for Climbing podcast that was just released a few weeks ago, I talked about in-season training at the gym, during the week, for weekend performance. And I pretty much described just what you are doing. So I think you're doing great. The more of the aerobic workout you mentioned is much lower intensity. You could actually, if it's quite low in intensity, kind of like that arc training where you're not getting pumped at all, you're just kind of climbing for 20 minutes on big holds, and you have blood circulating through your muscles, but again, you're not getting pumped, you're not going anaerobic. You could even do that on Thursday morning or Thursday midday as a third workout for the week. But you would not want to get carried away. You wouldn't want it to turn into something more than that aerobic system workout. You would kind of view that as being an active recovery type session. It's a fine line between being in that aerobic zone exclusively, where you get no pump, and then crossing occasionally into the anaerobic lactic zone, where you start to get pumped. And so that fine line, and it might be the difference between a 5 out of 10 intensity, where you're still mostly aerobic, or you are aerobic with no pump, and then the intensity getting to a 6 or a 7 out of 10, and all of a sudden you're getting pumped. Not viciously pumped, but you're getting pumped, but it's kind of a manageable pump. And so when you get into that manageable pump area, and then you climb for several minutes and do repeats, maybe a series of 2 to 4 minute burns that are manageable pump, that's kind of that classic threshold training where you're right, going back and forth, you're right on that fence between, fully maximized aerobic energy production and then starting to dip into the anaerobic lactic system. And that threshold training is also very important. And to me, I kind of view that as being more power endurance training, like what you would do on your Thursday session, where you're getting pumped but managing the pump. That you wouldn't want to do on Thursday, I don't think. But that could be part of your Wednesday workout. And, that threshold where you're back and forth on either side of the fence of aerobic into anaerobic, that's where we reside when we route climb a lot. If you're route climbing within a number or two of your limit, you're going anaerobic for a few hard moves, and then you're aerobic when you're in bigger holds and easier moves. And you're going back and forth trying to manage the pump and get to the anchors before you pump out. And so that threshold is a very important place to be. But, climbing at the red, you're climbing in that threshold a lot. So I don't know that you need to train it again during the week if you're training it at the Crag on Saturday and Sunday. Now, for someone who, isn't maybe, getting so pumped on the weekends or isn't climbing at all on the weekends, then they would want to get 1 or 2 of those threshold sessions in during the week. Because again, my philosophy is during the in season of climbing, I think it's great to hit each energy system hard 1 day a week. So in your case, that Tuesday is the strength and power. That's the anaerobic alactic, max strength, max power. And then your Wednesday is more the lactic system, your power endurance. And then your Red River Gorge weekend climbing is all of the energy systems, but it's a lot of the aerobic energy system. Because if you're climbing multiple routes that take 5, 10, 15 minutes, at the red, and you're getting pumped, well, it's very aerobic and, also obviously very anaerobic if you're getting pumped out. Okay, so there's a long story to a short question. Let's move on here. My friend Neil Shepard, how are you, Neil? Listening in from Spain today. So lucky that you're in Spain. I have not climbed in Spain, really. I was there 20 some years ago, very briefly, on a trip to climbing in Buix and Verdun. On a couple of rest days, we drove down to the Costa Brava, more for the beach. And so, unfortunately, I have not been there kind of when Spain is in season. But my hope is to get there during the winter season next year for an extended stay. at Margalef or elsewhere. And so hopefully we'll cross paths there, or maybe like at Seus this next summer, who knows. Okay, so another question here. Hey coach, for which energy system should I train antagonist muscles? Okay, yeah, so in the context of energy system training, what you want to avoid with antagonist muscles, and I feel pretty strongly about this, we're talking about those pushing muscles, like when you're doing push-ups or dips, and I think you could even throw your leg muscles into this. I think it's good to train, strength, but with only a few reps so that it's more alactic power, and train those pushing muscles and the leg muscles, or deadlifting, things like that. Not like you're a bodybuilder at all, but instead a little more like a power lifter, but again, not getting carried away. And I think if you're training twice a week, say on those push muscles, maybe one day I'm doing sets of 3 to 5 reps. Obviously, you need to get warmed up before you jump in and put on heavy weights and do 3 to 5 reps. Maybe do a couple of sets of each exercise at 3 to 5 reps. And then the other workout, if you're doing 2 a week for the antagonist muscles, train the other end of the spectrum, which would be more endurance, and do a much lighter weight for 20 to 25 reps. And avoid that middle zone, which is where bodybuilders train, from like 8 to 15 reps. That middle zone, if you put on 75% of one repetition max weight and do 8 or 10 reps, that is the zone that it is very lactic when you're weightlifting. You get pumped, you get fatigued, and you signal the muscles to get bigger and also to store more glycogen. And so if you, even for a few weeks, did that type of training with your push muscles, you would bulk up. You would see your pecs get bigger. You would see your triceps get substantially bigger. If you did it with your legs, you would see your leg muscles get bigger and potentially put on a few kilograms or several pounds of weight in a place that you don't want the weight. And so if you train for climbing and put on some mass in your climbing muscles, that's fine. But if you're putting on weight in your non-climbing muscles, that is suboptimal, especially if you like climbing overhanging boulders and routes where ultimately there's more weight on your fingers than on your toes. That weight is counterproductive. Now, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of body weight. Some other episode I'll maybe go there because it's a bit of a controversial topic. But circling back to your question, you want to get stronger in those antagonist muscles. And obviously all the muscles that surround your shoulder and even the small rotator cuff muscles are very, very important to support climbing performance. And so if you can train them up to have more strength and more endurance, that's a good thing. You just don't want them to get bigger. And you can get stronger and develop more endurance if you train right without them getting bigger, because you can get neural adaptations that make you stronger and more powerful. The motor unit recruitment, makes you stronger without hypertrophy. And also, making more capillaries in the muscles gets more blood flow in and out of the muscles and lends more endurance to those muscles. So hence the idea that you want to have a polarized training approach for the antagonist muscles. The one day where you're training more maximum strength, 3 to 5 reps, which is again going to be more of a nervous system adaptation. And then the second session of the week where you're doing a much lighter weight, maybe 50% of your one repetition max weight, but you're knocking out 20 or 25 reps. And you'll get a little pump from that, but it'll be you'll be exercising for more than a minute to knock out those 20 to 25 reps, or maybe around a minute. And that becomes more oxidative than it is anaerobic. And so it's more going to train up the slow twitch fibers and trigger some adaptations that in the long term, if done consistently, will give you more endurance in those muscles. So that would be the approach, and avoid anything that makes you bulk up in those non-climbing muscles. Okay, so we're over a half an hour into the cafe. I guess it's time to put out my last call for questions and coffee. And if there's nothing else typed in the next minute or so, well, then we'll sign off. But I really do appreciate you joining in. It's always nice to have an international audience for the Training Cafe. And if you're wondering about my schedule coming up, I'm headed to the Red River Gorge myself for a couple of weeks. I've got some German friends showing up in November, so we're going to show them a good time. They'll obviously just obliterate me climbing wise, but that's fine. I enjoy seeing my friends crush, and these German fellows will definitely crush. Maybe you'll read more about it in the coming weeks, who knows. And then after, well, Thanksgiving often for me is the end of my outdoor climbing season, just because it gets cold and nasty here in Pennsylvania and in this region. There can be a rare sunny day, but I'm not a great cold weather climber. I have poor circulation in my fingers and toes. And so I prefer during the cold weather season to be, back in a training mode here at home, or perhaps traveling to somewhere warm like in the Southwest, which I would like to do in January or February, though I have no plans for that just yet. Looks like we got one or two more questions typed in here, and then we'll wrap things up here. Okay, let's see what we got here. Derek, good afternoon, coach. Any recommendations on how to improve velocity of movement between holds? Well, I guess I would have to talk with you more to get an explanation of what you're talking about exactly. It always pays on a difficult route on small holds to reduce the time under tension, to get from one hold to the next as fast as possible. And, that often comes down to how well you know the route and how quickly you can move from one foothold to the next and get proper placement. Obviously, if you go fast and degrade the placement of your feet or botch your sequence or not hit the optimal body positions, the nuance that is required for hard moves, if you're missing any of that, then going faster is actually hurting your performance. But yes, you want to climb as fast as you can without a loss in execution. In terms of training it, well, plyometric type exercises, campus training, obviously for climbers is the go-to because it demands explosive movements. Certainly when you boulder or do campus boarding, or I should say system boarding, there will be certain moves that require dead pointing and dynamic movements. And so I think that type of climbing, if you are doing it on your strength and power day, you view that as being something that's going to improve velocity. But actual improving the velocity that you climb a boulder or route is something that takes practice. And when you're projecting a boulder or route, you are getting a little faster each go, usually, as you get to know the body positions and the movement more quickly. And so, that's kind of a movement skill that you have to develop through practice versus just pure training and velocity that comes from, a campus board type exercise. Question from Mexico. In the max strength training, how to control the change in our day by day. Not sure what you're saying there, but your max strength will vary day to day based on recovery. The nervous system, if you hit it really hard with like a max strength workout with weighted hangs or one arm pull-ups or weighted pull-ups, that can take 3 or 4 days to get back 100%, maybe even more if you really go hard. And so if you're trying to do that workout every other day, you're not going to be at 100% every day, and so that type of session, you need to either make the workouts a little less intense so you don't dig yourself such a deep hole to recover from, or spread them out and do that strength power workout only once every 4 days. And then hopefully you get back to 100%. But that's something you want to use auto-regulation. Like when you do your warm-up at a session, try to assess how recovered you are. And if you're not fully recovered, then it's probably foolish slash counterproductive to just blast into your next hard workout. But maybe instead do an easier workout when you identify you're not 100%. I guess last question here, and then we'll wrap it up. Would you recommend taking Supercharged Collagen as a morning recovery after the nights before a workout? Okay, so the collagen is ideally consumed an hour before you load your connective tissues. So if you're going to go for a run, you consume it an hour before you run, before you're loading your tendons and ligaments of your knee and hips and such. If you're doing a hangboard or bouldering workout, you consume the collagen an hour before you do that workout. And that is what research has shown is the optimal time to consume the hydrolyzed collagen, the PhysiVantage Supercharged Collagen, which is the gold standard, of course. Post-workout, it's all about a complete protein with a lot of those branched chain amino acids. So animal-based products are ideal. If you're going to have a dinner with a piece of meat, that's perfect. If you're going to have a dinner that is just say pasta and vegetables, which I often do, well then I need to consume a protein shake either with that meal, or oftentimes I consume that protein shake right before I go to bed. If I wake up the next morning and it's a rest day, I do consume the Supercharged Collagen on an empty stomach as soon as I wake up. And then I go down and do what I call a protective session, or just a wake-up session, of training. So I consume the collagen, when I'm, up, empty stomach, drink some coffee, and then 30 to 60 minutes later, I go down and do a couple of sets of pull-ups, a couple of hangs on big holds. I do a little bit of rotator cuff. I'm talking like a 15-minute session that is not exhaustive in any way. It just loads a few critical connective tissues. And with that collagen consumed before that, it helps spur on the remodeling and turn on the collagen synthesis in all of those places I'm trying to keep healthy. My fingers, my elbows, my shoulders. And doing that on rest days is actually super effective. I wrote an article on this a year or two ago. It's on the PhysiVantage website, and I did a video also on my YouTube channel that it's, I call it kind of protective training, because the goal of the workout isn't to get stronger or produce adaptations that make you stronger, but instead to trigger adaptations that spur on remodeling of connective tissues. Which will make you more bulletproof, or if you're currently tweaked, injured, can help spur on healing. And so it's a really effective thing to do on your rest days. And so that's something you might want to look into, as those protective workouts. So in any case, collagen before you train, before you load, and then a good whole food protein, or a good whey isolate, or a good plant-based protein post-workout or before bed for muscle recovery. That is the optimal nutrition to, in my opinion. Okay, well that does it. Raise our cups here one more time. We sip coffee together in the spirit of climbing. Climbers around the world unite. And until next time, happy climbing.